Welcome, everyone, to the Energy Advisors podcast. I am Rex, the Energy Guy, your host. Glad to have you with us today, no matter where you're listening to around the planet or watching. We actually have now participants in the show in 18 countries, so it's pretty exciting to have people following us along. I'm excited about today's episode because I have a guest that I have been wanting to get on my program for quite a long time. And so you'll be excited to meet her and talk about the stuff today. So it's good stuff. However, we'll take care of the housekeeping real quick before we get started. I want to talk about real quick and recognize our good friends that support the show. Smart Energy Centers coming to across the United States, be about 2,600 locations on a full footprint. And you'll be able to walk in and find just about anything in the energy transition tools. So if you can find it, you can think about it, they're available in those stores. Our friends at Taxhive. Taxhive is an important sponsor of the program because renewables are really found affordable because of tax credits. You never want to do it yourself. Don't DIY your taxes. You're not going to DIY a solar installation, so don't DIY your taxes. So good friends at Taxhive can help you, and they'll work with you for over 5 years to make sure you get all the tax incentives and rebates that you're entitled to. And then lastly, we'll have some new ones coming up here shortly. Our good friends over at Go Green Community Initiative. Listen, I tell people it's important before you embark on this journey for energy transition, you want to get some baseline. You want to understand what's possible, what are the programs, what are the technologies, and a place to start. People only have a limited amount of credit and a limited amount of money, so you want to make sure that you don't paint yourself into a corner. So thanks to those sponsors, they help us get the show produced and out to everyone. All right, so I can't wait for this one. This has been fun. I interviewed one of her peers way back in the day when we first got this started. But I'd like to introduce to you the executive director of the California Solar and Storage Association, Bernadette Del Chiaro. I'm sorry, Bernadette. I even, went there. So welcome. Glad to have you with us.
It's great to be here, Rex. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, as we do on the program, it's not just about the geek stuff or the policy or the organizations. We like to learn about the people, the people behind the power that's happening around the world. So I'd like to go back a little bit in your history. Now, it doesn't have to be when I was 2 years old, I found my first whatever, okay? But I'd like to understand and help our audience understand, because we have a lot of students that listen and, people all over the place. What was your education? What was your family life a little bit? And then how did you just sort of hopscotch up to where you are today as the executive director of CALSSA?
Well, where to start? So I grew up in a small town called Sonoma, famous for its wines. But when I was a kid in the 1970s, it was really not famous for anything. It was just a small rural, ag town. And I was raised by two lovely human beings who worked hard and put all their money into putting us girls through Catholic school. and
Nice.
And then it wasn't until I really ended up, in the 8th grade, I ended up going to public school for actually most of my education, despite my parents' efforts to the contrary, and got to go on a trip to Yosemite National Park. And this was not a place, my parents didn't really go on many vacations. So it really expanded my horizons and made me realize just how beautiful this planet was. And it really kind of sparked in me an interest in sort of the broader environment. And I ended up being what my dad called one of those berserkly kids. So I went to UC Berkeley. Don't hold it against me. And studied about the environment, both what the problems were facing our planet, and then also what the politics and just sort of the human interactions and kind of where the sources of all of the problems that we were facing. And this would have been in the early 1990s when climate change was still a brand new idea.
Right.
And mostly people were concerned about, clean water and clean air. And So that kind of started in me a lifelong interest in working to just um, make our world a better place. And I've just landed in this space of clean energy, and particularly rooftop solar and now batteries, though those two things are synonymous really in my head. Mostly because, again, coming from sort of a very sort of middle class, working class background, I really love solutions that average everyday people can embrace. I
Right.
think that captures really the power of America and of our love of innovation and ingenuity and solutions. And so I think solar just really um, is the most promising of all the solutions out there. It's the most promising and the most inspiring, and frankly, the most impactful. Because if we can't get our air clean and our climate back under sane levels of control, then I think kind of all other issues fall off the map in my mind.
So did you have any other career stops along the way from the time you were at Cal Berkeley to where you are today? Because you got a lot of young listeners out there that are thinking about career moves. So what kinds of work did you do before you got to CALSSA?
Well, I worked for a number of nonprofit. I've always done nonprofit advocacy. When I was at Berkeley and studying these problems facing really the planet, but especially here in the United States, I just realized that there weren't there really weren't a lot of policies or laws on the books to make sure that this public interest of the need for clean air and the need for clean water was sort of properly positioned in our civilization, in our way of government. And so I just realized in order to make that happen, you're going to need to work in the political sphere. Even though I wasn't really a politics kid, don't come from a political family. I kind of come into politics a bit begrudgingly, a little bit unwillingly, but I just recognize that this is the space that we need to make sure that the public's voice is very loud and heard very clearly. And so I have always just done this level of public interest, public policy work. Started off with various small nonprofits in the environmental space,
Okay.
and from there, um, sort of stumbled in the early 2000s on this issue of rooftop solar,
Right.
um, realizing in the early 2000s that nobody really in California was working on it. I mean, there were a few local initiatives in places like San Francisco that were really groundbreaking, but they were very, very small in scope. Nobody was working on a statewide level to promote rooftop solar at any kind of big level. And so um, just serendipity had it. I teamed up with a state legislator in California. We pushed forward this big idea of incorporating solar into every roof in the state as we built our housing stock. And that got the attention of Arnold Schwarzenegger. It
Wow.
soon grew into the Million Solar Roofs initiative. And the rest is history, right? We met our Million Solar Roofs goal. We've built now 2 million solar roofs, and solar is now standard feature. It's
Yes.
mandated into all new construction. So it has snowballed from there, but it started off with some legislation proposed originally in 2003, and it's been a wild ride, ending at the California Solar and Storage Association, but still doing public advocacy work and public policy.
Wow. You really grew up in this industry then, from a professional perspective.
Yeah. I mean, part of what I love working for CALSSA, the California Solar and Storage Association, which I often remind people is the oldest and largest clean energy trade business group in the state, and one of the oldest and largest in the country, is I have a board of directors and members who have been in this for 40 plus years. They pioneered this technology. They've been in it for a lifetime and for the long haul. They've been through all the ups and downs. They really keep me sane through the kind of craziness of the last few years, because they're just a really steady hand. So I am still a newbie compared to those guys and gals, and I really respect them. But yes, I have been. At least I am one of the the old guards when it comes to the modern political sort of battle and journey of getting rooftop solar standardized and ubiquitous in the state of California.
Fantastic. So, how long have you been with CALSSA? And then did you come in as the executive director, or did you play other roles before you got to this point?
No, I came in as executive director. I had been running the climate and energy programs and overseeing all of the Western states for an organization called Environment America.
Okay.
So I came in as executive director. We had one staff person, a woman named Kelsey Jones, who's a local Coloradoan. And she and I kind of launched the modern day version of CALSSA in 2013. So it's been 11 years since I've been running CALSSA. We had, I think, fewer than 100 members back then in 2013, a very, very small budget, but we quickly just grew the organization, grew the staff, and we now have over 700 business members and 9 staff, which is still small for the size of the California market, but much bigger than our humble beginnings.
Wow. So that 9 staff, do you have your team kind of divided in some disciplines that they're working on or programs, or how's their team look like today?
Yeah, great question. So I have my sort of organizational side of the team, right? Folks that help me with the administration, the membership, the marketing, and events. And then I have my program team. My program team is I have a program director, Brad Hevener. Many people know him. He's been with me almost as long, almost 11 years now as well. And then under Brad, we have somebody who focuses almost exclusively on virtual power plants, VPP policy, just as the cutting edge of sort of policy ideas that we're trying to really push through in California. I have somebody who's focused almost exclusively on interconnection issues, since that is such a major barrier for the cost-effective and timely installation of solar and batteries.
Right.
I have somebody who's dedicated just to permitting and codes and standards. Again, big major issue, major reason why we can't get costs to come down even further. And then, of course, California, just being such a large portion of the market, we end up being the tip of the spear when it comes to pushing, codes and standards, even though they're adopted at a national level. Oftentimes it's California that pushes those through. So that, and then I have somebody who works on consumer protection and kind of customer facing resources like our rebates and our other programs that interface directly with consumers. Brad handles all of our regulatory work. And then we have a lobbyist as well who handles our day-to-day lobbying work in the state capitol. So that's pretty much how we have things covered. I would love to have more staff to cover more issue areas. We're a big state, a big market. We are unique in that we are focused exclusively on the distributed side. Right. I should have said that right off the bat. It makes CALSSA very unique. There are a handful of other state trade groups that are like us, but we are very, very dedicated to the distributed. And that's everything from, huge megawatt, multi-megawatt projects, but they all have one thing in common, and that's they're behind the meter and built and serviced for the customer.
Okay, fantastic. So for those who are familiar with net metering and all of the policies and laws, and we have a lot to talk about that. So let's scoot back 11 years ago. What did the landscape look like from a perspective of a couple things? What was the relationship like with the utility companies? Did you have net metering in place? What were some of the policies? What did the landscape look like back 11 years ago when you first started?
Rex, it's a great question. Most people don't really ask me that question right off the bat, but it's a really important, actually, it was a very important time period for the California rooftop solar industry. And I think part of why CALSSA brought me on as their executive director is they recognized that they were in a place where the politics and the political fights were about to get really nasty, and they needed somebody who had some experience directly engaging in not just, kind of policy battles, which I was battle worn. I mean, it took us 4 years to get the Million Solar Roofs initiative adopted, even though we had the
Right.
governor on board, from the very beginning. So I was no stranger to the ins and outs of the politics behind the opposition to rooftop solar. But also, I think they recognized that they needed to be bigger than 100 companies with a itty
Sure.
bitty budget. And so what was happening, to answer your question, in 2013, the California rooftop solar market was just starting to really truly take off. We had gotten through the Great Recession of
Yep.
the late 2000 aughts, and then we had gotten through the major shortages in silica supply that happened
Yep.
around 2010, global shortages. So we had gotten past that, and the Solar City model of third-party ownership was just starting to work out the kinks and be kind of hit its stride. And
Right.
so as a result, we really started to see both the commercial and industrial, but also the residential markets in California start to take off. Now, I don't have these numbers memorized. When I say start to take off, they're itty bitty numbers by today's
Sure.
standards. But if you look at the charts, the graph, the growth graph, it really starts to take off around 2011, 2012. In 2013, the investor-owned utilities started getting nervous, and they started getting nervous that this rooftop solar thing wasn't just a flash in the pan, kind of annoying little gnat that they needed to keep batting away,
Right.
but
Right. Right.
rather it really was becoming mainstream. It was not just for enthusiasts and diehard environmentalists, but it was becoming very, very mainstream with middle class, working class families embracing it. It was starting to be sold thanks to the ingenious ideas behind was it Sungevity that I think
Yep.
launched the idea of selling it at Home Depot. So it was starting to really become commonplace, and the utilities got nervous. So with the help of think tanks at the Edison Electric Institute, they started to cook up this idea of the death spiral. I don't know if you're familiar or if you remember that, Rex, but back in 2013, the utilities' main argument against rooftop solar was that if all these people start defecting essentially from the grid, the utility is going to run out of money, and then they're
Yep.
going to die. And then we're going to have this huge infrastructure that nobody to take care of it. And this was,
Right.
they literally put out a white paper about the death spiral. And so they pushed a bill in 2013 that was a bill in California state legislature. It was an end of session little play that called for the end to net metering.
Oh my. Now, I'm sorry for the interruption. When did net metering actually start in California? In Colorado, they passed the initiative in 2004, and then it became part of the PUC, had to adopt it in 2005. So when did California start its net metering?
California first started net metering with legislation in 1996.
Oh,
So we
wow.
had net
Way
metering
ahead.
for quite some time. Yes. And but it really didn't take off.
No.
We only had a couple hundred net meter systems in the state when the electricity crisis happened in 2000, 2001.
Hmm.
That was a wake up call for Californians that our energy system was vulnerable, that we had too much reliance on natural gas. Natural gas was no longer seen after the electricity crisis. It was no longer seen as the bridge fuel to the future. It was instead, the fuel to nowhere. It really wasn't serving California well. We had major air pollution problems still in the state, and there was a growing awareness of climate change. And so Californians across the board started to look for alternatives to the big centralized fossil fuel natural gas industry. And out of that came two big initiatives. One was the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which was California's first mandate that the utilities procure a set amount, a minimum amount of renewable energy. And that really kickstarted the utility scale solar and storage industry for California. That was 2002. And then, of course, a few years later, we adopted the Million Solar Roofs. And all of that was what really got us going. And so the Million Solar Roofs initiative that was ultimately passed and adopted in 2006, what it did, it had three components to it. It extended net metering beyond its infinitesimally small caps. And when we first put it in place, we said, I think it was 0.25% of a utility's load,
Oh my
and then it was
goodness.
capped. Yeah, so it
Right.
was very, very small. So we upped the cap. We set aside $3 billion in incentive funds to cover the upfront cost of
Okay.
going solar, and then we mandated that all new construction, at least baby step, includes solar as an option, and that the state start looking at seriously at mandating solar into new construction, and so that launched the whole, today's building codes effort. So that was the Million Solar Roofs initiative, and that's what really then got net metered systems to take off, even though the policy had been on the books for 10 years prior to that.
Okay. Now, you guys went through a period of net metering 1.0 and then net metering 2.0. Can you talk a little bit about what happened there? And then we'll go to 3.0. And, it's
Yeah.
California just, it baffles me a little bit because the more I study it, it's such a progressive state and they're forward thinking. But some of the consequences of some of these things have been very juxtaposed or possibly unintended consequences. So, when did net metering 2.0 come onto the scene?
Yeah. Well, I think the common thread to California's mistakes is when it does things that the utilities and the energy industry ask for. So our deregulation law was pushed by the energy centralized energy businesses, and that went horrible. Right, we're still reeling from the mistakes of California's dereg law, and then NEM 3.0, what we're still reeling from today, which we'll get to, was done at the behest of our investor-owned utilities. So that's really the common thread. Otherwise, California does things pretty well. And we had, up until recently, an incredible track record of success, of consistency. We were, I would argue, the only place in the world that had the track record of consistent, smart, good policy, good development of new markets, whether we're talking about electric cars or solar roofs. We were the place to look to, and it's because we had, across administrations, across political parties, our agencies were all in lockstep with one another. We knew where we wanted to go, and the consumers and the customer base, the voters and the government was all in lockstep working together. That really started to change, and it started to change when the utilities really took aim at rooftop solar, and most especially, I'd say, when we transitioned from Jerry Brown to Gavin Newsom, is really when you start to see a very stark change in California's approach to rooftop solar. But to go to your question, so here's what happened in 2013. The utilities pushed through this bill last minute in the legislative session, and that bill basically called for an end to net metering. This was AB 327. Okay. That bill basically directed the PUC. They said, we're going to end net metering at this certain point. I won't bore you with the details of that. And once we hit that point, Public Utilities Commission, your job now is to come up with what sort of the next iteration of net metering looks like. And net metering, for those who aren't familiar, of course, is defined by people being able to put solar on their roof, use their own electricity in real time. Whatever they don't use at that moment in time, they export, they share it with their neighbors, and they get a bill credit. Yeah. The credit in traditional net metering terms is valued at retail rates. So what you would have otherwise bought your electricity for, that's the value of your credit. And then that goes to, cut against your usage at nighttime when electricity is actually pretty plentiful. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. But that in essence is net metering. And what AB 327 did is Public Utilities Commission, which is the state agency that regulates our investor-owned utilities, we want you to decide, what does the future of net metering look like? And they put it into the hands of the state agency. Now, the major difference here is, up until then, it was our democratically elected legislature that defined the terms of net metering. And they had created the program and then consistently renewed it and expanded it because it's wildly popular.
Right. That's a complete bipartisan type topic. Everybody wants the freedom to create their own electricity, and everybody wants the policies to work.
And net metering just makes a lot of sense. It's very simple. It's really simple for the consumer. We have, I like to point this out to everybody. 63% of our 2 million solar customers, California has 2 million roofs with solar on the roof, 2 million consumers. Of those, 63% are low and middle income families.
That's awesome.
52% are families of color.
Okay.
This is not a limited market. This market is embraced by everybody from our deep red, Republican held stronghold or Central Valley districts, all the way to our deep blue coastal liberal districts, everywhere and in between. Everybody loves solar. Everybody does. And so when it was up to our democratically elected legislature, rooftop solar consistently across 20 years saw support. Okay. When it was taken out of the hands of the legislature and given to a 5-member panel, all appointed by the governor,
right,
that's when we started to see things to be a little more dangerous. Now, under Governor Jerry Brown, the Public Utilities Commission, ordered by the legislature, took a first stab at modifying net metering.
Okay.
This was what we called NEM 2.0. So NEM 1.0 was everybody that had gone solar under the California net metering policy up until then. And then starting in 2016, began NEM 2.0. Governor Brown was one of these governors who was a true believer in rooftop solar. He had cut his teeth in the off-grid movement of the 80s, the 70s and 80s. So he really, really got it. He really understood. And he, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Republican governor before him, and like you just said, Rex, really valued this idea of empowering consumers to make their own energy and to have independence. And, these are some pretty basic, I think, all-American ideals. Yeah. And both those two governors really embraced it and saw that attribute in rooftop solar and just really supported it. So Governor Brown made sure that when his Public Utilities Commission, with the 5 people he appointed, when they took on this task of modifying net metering, that they did it very, very carefully. And so as a result, the policy of NEM 2.0 that was put in place in 2016 was a haircut, is what we called it, but it was not at all something that we couldn't handle. We did see a small dip in the market. It took us a couple years to rebuild back to where we were, but we recognized that the governor personally made sure that policy change was not drastic, that it was mild, and that it allowed the industry to continue to grow and thrive. But when the commission adopted that, they said, under pressure from the utilities, they said, okay, but we're gonna reconsider this in a couple of years.
Right.
And so that started this sort of NEM 3.0. Unfortunately, when that policy was taken up, it was under a different administration. It was under Gavin Newsom administration. And therein lies the kind of difference. Is we now had a commission who was not being told by the governor, make sure this industry continues to thrive because this is so important to the state. Instead, we saw a very utility-friendly commission come in and just with a machete, just really cut up net metering to where it is today. And of course, we can dive into this, but I think the headline is our market is 60% below where it was before. Our market is set back 10 years. And we've lost dozens and dozens of companies. We've shed 17,000 jobs. That's how many jobs we've lost in 1 year. And we really are just, we're flatlined right now. We're not growing as a market. So California is in a difficult place. And like you said, it's very contradictory to our history, who we, I think, try to be as a state, our sort of state image. And it's just really bad for everyday people.
So question for you in California. I'm thankful in Colorado, the legislature has not handed over the decision policies to the PUC. Um, are the utility companies allowed to kind of like lobby the PUC? I mean, a five-person board is not a very wide, I don't know what you want to say, example of this perspective. I mean, that's not a very big group. So are they allowed to lobby?
Oh, absolutely. They are allowed to lobby. They are allowed to use ratepayer dollars to lobby
Uh,
against the interests of those very same ratepayers. A bill was introduced last year to modify that in California, and it died at the hands of the utilities. They are the 8,000-pound gorilla in both Sacramento and San Francisco, where our PUC is based. They have legions of lawyers and millions of dollars to spend in campaign contributions alone. Added together are three investor-owned utilities, PG&E, Southern California Edison, and Sempra, that owns San Diego Gas and
right.
Electric. They're the largest corporate campaign donors in the state. So that we are up against giants in sort of the fossil fuel, legacy energy industry, and they just wield a tremendous amount of power. And then to your point about the Public Utilities Commission, it's a very undemocratic body. It's appointed by one person. So all you have to do is really control one office and you control
Right.
the entire agency. So it's pretty, it's not necessarily the most, democratic, easy for the public to access decision-making body.
Yeah, I've read a lot about it. So, and I don't want to paint you in a corner to be name calling or disparaging anybody, but it was really disappointing to see that in California because you really took, the voters put in net metering and you took it out of the hands of the voters. I mean, the state did. And I'm sure that was with good intention, but the consequences were horrible. I mean, because I don't know what the total revenue of those three giants are, but it's in the billions and billions. It's what probably north of 100 billion, 200 billion. I mean, these people have a lot of money.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think some people had good intentions. I think, but ultimately the problem statement with net metering was always wrong. The problem statement was that the credit being based on retail rates was too high. That actually is the wrong problem statement. The problem California has had for about 10 to 15 years now is the regulators, the very same agency, the Public Utilities Commission, has failed horribly to restrain utility spending, to tell the utilities no to their always seeking higher and higher profits to please their shareholders. This is
Right.
the system we have set up where we have given not only a monopoly of our energy, sector over to a company, but we have given them the incentive, every incentive that there is to overspend and spend ratepayer dollars and therefore increase retail rates. So the problem statement was that net metering was a problem because the retail credit was too high, but that's wrong. The problem was rates were too high, driven by out of control utility spending. And if the regulators would just have stood up to the utilities, provided greater scrutiny on their proposals to spend more ratepayer dollars, then we would have seen less of an increase in rates. Net metering would still be with us today, right? So there was maybe good intentions, but certainly very quickly things spun out of control, and it was, I think, obvious to everybody that the ultimate decision was a bad one, and yet because of the politics, things did not get, the course didn't get corrected in time, and so we ended up with a really bad policy in California.
So in California now, essentially with net metering 3.0, you're mostly in a net billing situation. Is that correct? I mean, to help people understand that.
Yeah, we call it NEM 3.0 just because that's sort of the common lexicon so people can understand all of
Right,
these,
right.
this alphabet soup. But yeah, technically it is called the net billing tariff. It isn't really net metering anymore. It is net billing. And so ends up is if you have solar today and you under this new net billing tariff, you can still put solar on your roof. You can still use and self-consume, with one exception, which I'll come back to, but you can use your electricity in real time, right there in your home or your business. And then if you have any extra, you get what's called the avoided cost rate, which is around 4 cents a kilowatt hour, which is incredibly small. It makes it to where that export isn't really worth that much to you as a consumer. So you're best off adding a battery to your solar system and storing all of those excess generated during the day while the sun's up, and then you use it yourself in the evening. Yeah, that really ends up being the best payback for you as a consumer. The challenge with this new market now, and we are seeing today about 60% of solar projects have a battery attached to them, compared to 15% before. So we have seen a big jump in battery attachment rates. The problem with this is it pretty much doubles the cost of going solar. So if you're, having a hard time swallowing the $20,000 upfront cost of just going solar, it's going to be really hard to swallow $35,000 or more adding a battery, even if it's a better payback. And so I think consumers are just having a hard time getting used to this new market. And as a result, our sales are way down, which of course means that battery attachment rate it's not really producing more clean energy, if that makes sense. So it's 60% on a shrunken market, isn't better than 15% on a huge market. So things aren't really good.
What are the current adoption rates in California? We talked about this before we went on air. Where I live in Colorado, it's about 4.5%. What's adoption across the state of California in average?
On average, we're about 12%, maybe 13% in certain places. We are higher than most other states. Hawaii has a higher, of course, adoption rate. We are higher than most states. However, I always like to point out to people that 13%, 12%, that is still incredibly small. That still leaves, 80, almost 90% of California consumers without rooftop solar. So we are nowhere near saturation. We are nowhere near the end zone. We have a long way to go, and for California to be sort of slamming the brakes on this market is just very counter to what the state needs to be doing right now.
Well, and then you had some additional headwinds, and we'll talk about this real quick. Interest rates. Another sort of great program with unintended consequences. So when the ITC was passed and all this money was made available to help people with tax credits and investment programs and stuff, unfortunately, it jacked up inflation. And then when inflation goes up, what do you do to calm inflation? You raise the interest rates. So in my estimation, and looking at California, just knowing enough to be dangerous, you kind of had a double whammy. Not only did you have to go from net metering down to net billing, so, we can address this in a second, but now you had the compounding effect of the interest rates. So what happened in that double whammy? I mean, it was almost like the perfect storm to gut your industry.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And I'll add one extra little wrinkle to this. The Public Utilities Commission, I think recklessly, it's like they put on sort of blinders and they plugged their ears when we were saying, please don't do this. Please, this is too drastic of a change. We need a glide path. If you want to transition the way you want to transition, fine. But we absolutely need a glide path because we need to ramp up batteries. We need to get prices down on batteries. We're nowhere near where, the market's not where you need it to be right now. We said, please don't. You're going to cause this market to go to a major tailspin. And they said, we're going to do it because you are about to get the investment tax credit. And they used the Biden administration and the Democrats and Congress's enthusiasm for clean energy. Washington, D.C., really for the first time in a major way, getting behind clean energy. They used that as actually the impetus for California pulling back on its incentives for clean energy. And the logic was so skewed because, of course, the math for a consumer is the investment tax credit was at 24%, 26%, some of the years, 24. It got extended to 30. I'm not going to sneeze at that. I mean, we'll take an extra 6% or whatever, but that's not a huge change
No.
for the consumer. So for the math of a consumer, the extension of the investment tax credit didn't make a huge difference. And then, as you pointed out, we also had the high interest rates affecting the whole entire economy, but definitely influencing consumer buying power and consumer purchasing decisions. And so we absolutely had this double whammy, as you mentioned, of high interest rates, yes, an investment tax credit, but it wasn't that much different. It wasn't like a huge infusion of new money for the consumer. And then, of course, the net metering rug being ripped out from underneath us. And so as a result, we saw these catastrophic impacts on the industry. And these are impacts that I'm not sure that every policymaker in California has really owned up to and acknowledged. I think that's one of the things that's frustrating for us in California is that we're still in this place of a lot of the folks that were directly involved in this bad decision just really still haven't acknowledged that, there was some bad impacts by this policy.
Well, I was sharing with you before we got on. I'm a technologist. I come out of technology, and you always have these cycles of innovation, a ton of hopscotch and stuff. And I was recently on a interview with a consultant, and I was saying, there's technology that's just on fire. I mean, there's really great technologies coming along, but the biggest upgrade we need is in policymakers. That's the biggest upgrade because
Yeah.
if you think about it, there's so many things happening to help reduce costs, but the policymakers are people who are not very well informed. They don't understand the technologies. They don't looking at this from the average person's pocketbook. It's really funny, and I'll make this wise crack. Most people think when you hear Edison Electric Institute, like it's some great think tank, and they're coming up with great new ideas and all this stuff. People don't realize that's the cartel of the stock traded, the shareholder companies, and they deliver 75% of our electricity. And so they have an agenda. And, I understand both sides of that, but it really is disheartening to me about policy because policy really impacts things. And it's, like you said, flatlined your industry with unintended consequences. So I want to circle back to a question I have for you because I find it a little bit surprising not knowing that much about California politics. I get a lens of California. I mean, I'm outside of Boulder, so we're not quite Cal Berkeley. But what was the big difference with Gavin's appointments compared to the others? Were these, what happened there?
It's interesting. I think the people that serve on these commissions are really good people. I mean, they genuinely are good people. And they mean well. And, they're constantly making trade-offs. And so they might make a good decision on, say, electric cars that makes them feel really good about what they're doing for the planet. And then they'll make a bad decision on rooftop solar and they'll kind of justify it in their heads. And so there actually isn't that big of a difference in the quality of the people being appointed.
Okay.
What the difference is, these agencies aren't independent. They like to pretend that they are, but they're not. And, it's not that hard to, have control or, to gain a lot of access if it's just one office that you need to gain access to. And so I think the difference was with previous governors, we had a clear directive from the very top.
Okay.
Keep growing rooftop solar. This is a promising technology for all of California. This is this is our legacy. This is a legacy of ours. This was a clear message from the very top. And unfortunately, our current governor really never made energy a priority. He had other priorities and good for him. There are a lot of problems for California. And This governor has worked very hard for the state to solve problems, and those, some of them are really hard problems to solve. So, he hasn't been as successful, I'm sure, as he'd like to be, but he never made energy a priority, and that really showed from day one. And so it's very easy if you don't make it a priority and you don't have staff that are really knowledgeable and are guiding policy decisions. It's just pretty easy to send it off to the wolves, and that's kind of what happened. Is the utilities just gained too much influence, and they kind of run the show. A lot of former executives staff up, key policy positions, and this is what happens when you allow these utilities that have a very specific self-interest, and they're just acting rationally, right?
Sure.
The way you mentioned, it's they want to earn a profit. They want to earn a higher profit every quarter. They earn profit off of building poles and wires. And I don't know if it's like this in Colorado, but that is how California's utilities earn a profit. They get a guaranteed profit off of every dollar they spend on large capital outlay projects, at large capital infrastructure projects. They don't earn off of operations and maintenance, making the grid safer. And they don't earn it in any other way. They just earn it off of building stuff. And so each, cycle, they come to the Public Utilities Commission. They say, we need to spend $10 billion more on building a bigger grid. The Public Utilities Commission doesn't really have the mental muscle to counteract that or debate it. So they just go, okay, and off we go. And they earn ever higher profits, and rates go ever higher. And unless you really make energy a priority as a governor, it's very easy for that to just get out of control. And I think that is precisely what has happened in California. And it's, I wish, because I think energy is so critical to any state, to our economy. I wish that the governor had made energy a priority like his two predecessors. Like I said, I recognize he has a lot of other priorities, and I respect that he needs to prioritize, but this is unfortunately what happens when you don't keep control, and the fox gets to watch the hen house.
Yeah, that's crazy. I have a friend that I had actually met at a conference, and we could be pretty good buddies. And he said, the PUC in California folded like a cheap lawn chair. And so I always remembered that one. Yeah, I guess that's kind of what happens. But it's the issue of big money, and I'm fair and objective. Okay, we can't. I think the business model has to change with the utility companies. It really has to change. We can't objectively look at them and say, "Oh, forego all your rate, revenue, and yet you still maintain the grid," right? So there's an element to that. I also understand publicly traded companies, because I helped create one of those one time, and it's all about shareholder value. You have to report, because that's who the CEO reports to, and the C-suite and all those guys. But still, it's not in the greater good of everyone to do that, and it's really set the industry back. And I don't like to call it greed, because in the big scheme of things, we need the electrical companies. We're going to need them to be a part of this, solving these challenges. However, it can't go forward in the method that it is today. That's sort of my soapbox on that. So I don't have any answers for it. I mean, it's very difficult, but I think as the centralized energy producers are going to have to reconstitute how those companies are created, or how they're maintained, and their revenue sources, because it's difficult, because you have to look at all sides. We have to look at everything, because not everything's going to have the opportunity to create its own electricity.
Well, I think what you're saying by that is not every house is well suited for solar.
Correct.
Some are shaded, some aren't oriented in the right way. I think that's true. Although, let me just say, we are nowhere near, again, coming anywhere close to putting solar up on all the roofs where it is obviously a good idea. So anybody that flies into Burbank or Orange County or LAX, Ontario, I mean, pretty much all over the state, We have lots and lots of bare naked roofs baking in the
Oh,
sun every summer afternoon. So we are nowhere close. So I tend to want to point that out.
mhm,
We also are nowhere close to maxing out on solar on parking lots,
correct.
or solar on it within our built environment that might not be attributed to a single meter on a single family home, for example. Those types of community level projects could absolutely fill in the gaps for those few homes in California that are shaded.
Right.
So there's no shortage of what we can do. And you're absolutely right. What our number one problem is that the utilities, it's not in their self-interest. In fact, it is the opposite. It is against their interest to build out energy infrastructure that does not require poles and wires. Those of us in the energy geeky world, we call these things non-wires
Yep.
alternatives. So
Right.
rooftop solar is an example. Energy efficiency really is a non-wires alternative. Demand response, things that help guide your appliances to work in different times, to help you and help the grid. These are things that don't require more poles and
Right.
wires. And that is directly in opposition to the utilities profit model. So what we need to do is modernize these utilities,
Right.
bring them up to the 21st century, make it to where their profit incentive aligns with the public's interest.
Right.
The public's interest is build less, do more, be
Yes.
smarter, right? This is like, we all understand this now.
Right.
And, the Internet of Things is now come to energy. We can share energy in a decentralized way, just like we share information in a decentralized way. It is not the same as the 1950s, right? And so we need to modernize our utilities, get them back in line with where we need them to go for this new century that we're in and the problems we need to address. I thought Mary Powell, CEO of Sunrun, made a really interesting point the other day at a PV Magazine conference where she said, there are no grid solutions.
Right.
There are no grid solutions for this sort of post decarbonization, post climate reality world. The grid simply cannot be relied upon to generate and produce all of our electricity going forward. It cannot. We just physically cannot move that much juice, that many wires that are exposed to that many natural elements. What there are is energy solutions. There are energy solutions. There is energy resiliency solutions for consumers, but we have to stop thinking about it as a grid solution.
Right.
There are projects that can be in alignment. And so one of the things I started thinking about, if you don't mind me going down this little
Oh,
detour, Rex, is, people ask me all the time, what about grid defection with California coming after solar users, with taxes and high fixed charges and low export credits and all of this crap? You're just going to see people defect from the grid. And of course, I understand where they're coming from. And we are seeing a lot of
right.
people just unplug from the grid and just put in tons and tons of batteries. But I object to that word defection. And if you look it up in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, it by definition means a concerted effort to not comply, like to basically abandon your responsibility.
Right. You become
It's
energy outlaws, right?
yes, yes, and it's like, wait a minute, the PG&E doesn't own my energy. They don't
Right.
own my energy consumption. They don't own the sun that falls on my roof. This isn't something I'm obligated at all to participate in.
Right.
And I don't think any consumer thinks they're obligated to participate in this system that's not working for them anymore, frankly.
Right.
And so I think no longer it should be grid defection, or grid resources or grid solutions. It is energy resources, energy solutions. And it's up to the grid operators to come into accordance with these solutions, to align their grid to work with the energy solutions that work for consumers. And I think we need to start reorienting the way we think about all this stuff and have the consumer be in the middle of the equation as opposed to at the tail end of it.
I agree. Are you familiar with the technology adoption life cycle bell curve?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, a little
So
bit, but you can enlighten me
I want
more.
to point this out. I'm a geek. I come out of tech and I've been through many innovation cycles where different products were adopted. Now, California leads the country 100%, and like you said, 12, whatever, 13% in that range. Okay. When you look at a bell curve of technology adoption, you don't come out of early adapters until you're at 16% of an adoption. And so you don't come into early majority until you're past that 16%. And then you don't even come anywhere near late majority. And then there's the laggards that are never going to do anything. And unfortunately, I didn't put a graph up, but I didn't know if we would go here today. So we're just on the very, very end of early adopters. And that's in California, who might have 2 or 3 times adoption rates to, say, a place like Nebraska or something like that. And I'm not, my friends in Nebraska, I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying. And
Yeah.
so it's very, very early. And then a couple of things that I want to go back to one point because you talked about, and then we're going to come back to this. But I just have to get this off my mind before I forget it because I'm getting old and I don't remember everything all the time. You mentioned about 60% of the solar installs now have batteries. Okay, I want to help people understand something about the current battery technologies. They're not big enough. They're too expensive. Okay, typical home might go, I don't know, 13 kilowatt hours a day consumption. But if I have a Tesla Powerwall 3, which is one of the new cool technologies out there, it's 1 day worth of storage. Well, if I have a burp in the grid, you mean I only have 1 day worth of storage available to me? Or all of a sudden I've configured my house with 13 kilowatt hours and now I added an EV or, I upped my percentage. Now, I'm not going to say you have a home growing operation because that doesn't work in every state. But that's one of the constraints that we have right now is some of the technology hasn't caught up. Now, some of the suppliers like Panasonic, Samsung, Savant, they're getting much bigger batteries. I just looked at a battery from Savant that's 20 kilowatt hours. That's still not big enough. And the problem with it is the cost per kilowatt hour is still too high. And like you said, yeah, I might have a hard time swallowing a $20,000 bill, to get in it. Now it's 35,000, but the storage costs need to come down. If it's really going to help all of us, it needs to come down. And I think that's across the board of almost all the technologies because it's too expensive still to make the financial sense when you're in a situation like California is.
Well, I can't agree with you more, and I think everybody in the industry would agree. This is the problem exactly with the way California addressed this policy question. They wanted batteries to become synonymous with every solar roof overnight
Right.
without recognizing that to do that, you need to develop a market. You need to create economies of scale. You need to drive demand in order to help manufacturers lower costs.
Right.
This is exactly what we did for rooftop solar with the Million Solar Roofs initiative. We said, we're going to commit ourselves as a state to creating a 3 gigawatt market, which was big back then. We now have 16 gigawatts, but 3 was big because we were at basically 0. 3 gigawatt market. We're going to do that through an upfront incentive that is going to slowly reduce over time. So
Right.
it encourages consumers to get in early. But if you do, we're going to cover 50% of that cost of that solar system to make this affordable for you. And then if you get in 5 years from now, you'll get a smaller rebate, but hey, the cost has come down. So your
Right.
out-of-pocket expenses about the same. This is what we did, and we allowed the industry globally to ramp up production and lower prices. We saw prices drop 80%
Right.
over the course of that initiative. California just wanted to magically make that happen for batteries. They did not do what it needed to do to provide incentives to cover the upfront costs. We don't have a mainstream battery rebate program in California to lower the upfront costs. They did not really lean into cost-cutting measures like interconnection streamlining. We're still struggling with permitting streamlining, and then at the same time rip the rug out from underneath the market so that the solar product is now more expensive to the consumer. So
Right.
it's like we just made multiple. So it's like everybody wants the price of batteries to come down,
Right.
but you can't just
Magic.
will it to happen. It doesn't just happen that
Woo,
way.
here's my magic wand. Here we're blessed here in Colorado because the Colorado Energy Office, friends over there, Will Tour and crew, they do have state-sponsored incentives for battery. And then, of course, our largest energy supplier here, Excel, they actually have them. So that's one example that's awesome because you've got federal tax credits, you've got state, and now you have rebates from the electricity supplier. Well, now those we're talking about batteries, it's not quite giving them away, but it really incentivizes their growth. But again, there's going to be technology improvements. It has to come. So I want to bring up a topic and see what you think about this. Okay. Tesla, everybody loves Tesla. They're doing a lot of great things, and I don't give them a hard time for many things. I think Elon is doing a lot of really great things for the entire world, all the stuff he's working on. But I think there's a sneaky thing going on. Okay, what are your thoughts on bidirectional charging EVs? Okay, now in renewables, it all comes down to use case, right? Not everything fits for everybody. Okay. So if you look at like the Ford F-150 Lightning pickup, it's a great bi-directional. So I can run my house on it at night as a battery and I can charge it during the day. But that means I have to have my vehicle at home. So I still need a battery at home. Now, if I work from home, it's not a bad model. Okay. So these are starting to come out. Tesla's, so Ford's EV, the Lightning, it's 131 kilowatt hour battery. So it's like, 9-10 days possibly. The Cybertruck is 193. And so if you get the bigger batteries. So it's an interesting move. And Tesla has committed to having all of their new EVs to be bidirectional by 2026. But is Elon slow rolling that so he can sell more power walls?
Oh, I highly doubt that. No, I think the EV market is way more lucrative
Yes,
than
I
a
know. I know.
stationary. I wish our market was rivaling the EV market, but no,
Yeah.
no. But I think you make a really good point. Batteries on four wheels, which is all the Tesla cars are, and that's all the
Yeah.
Chevy Bolt is really. It's a
Yep. All of
battery
them.
on four wheels.
Yep.
Um, they are an amazing potential resource for the consumer when there's a disaster strikes, when the grid goes down.
Right.
Bi-directional, you can use that car to offset, to augment your stationary battery if we go through some crazy prolonged period where it's cloudy, so your battery doesn't get recharged in the
Yeah.
morning and blah blah blah. I am still of the mind, and Rex, you and all your listeners can just hang me out on the line and say you never got it, you weren't visionary enough. But
Right.
I, as a mother and a two EV car household, I still see that the car range as a precious commodity, and I also work in an office, and so I think this idea of the battery on four wheels replacing the battery hanging in my garage, I don't think we're quite there. I
No,
think bidirectional is really cool from a backup power, but I think it's better. I just think most consumers are going to want that battery to get them from point A to point B, and not to power their refrigerator.
I agree. I agree. So I'm not poo-pooing it, but it's just something that's on the horizon. Okay.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
comes back to that phrase use case. Now, if I had the perfect world where, let's say, husband and wife or spouses both worked at home, okay, and I was able to have my solar charge my battery and stuff, that might be a use case that works.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
still think you
And
need a stationary battery.
I do too. And frankly, we should just be all systems a go, all of these different, we should be integrating cars to be bidirectional
Yes.
yesterday. There's no reason not to,
No.
but But to assume,
it's just changing out the inverter. That's all you're doing.
yeah, but to assume that that's going to take the place. So I've had policymakers here in California go, we shouldn't incentivize stationary batteries because they're going to get phased out tomorrow by, the F4
No,
150. And I'm like, okay, no, I don't, that's
no,
not
no,
where,
no.
I don't think that's right. I just don't think that's where consumers are going to be.
No, I agree with you. But it's just interesting to see what happens there. Because again, when people talk to me about, oh, what about my energy transition stuff? It's like, well, not everything fits. There's use cases to everything. It's just like you talked about shading issues or roof angles and stuff. I think that it's important. So I want to hop over to another topic here. Um, you've had some pretty significant headwinds. Okay. We've talked about policy in California, PUC. Um, we talked about the economics of the inflation, lack of some of the incentives and those types of things. Is there any other headwinds that you're running into in the marketplace in California?
Oh boy. I could spend another hour talking about all the different headwinds that are coming. But I mean, some of the two, I'll give you just two really big ones.
Okay.
Um, One is we are seeing local jurisdictions, despite California passing a mandate that all jurisdictions in California, these are permitting offices in cities and counties that give you the building permit to put solar on your home or on your commercial building. Despite the fact that we passed a law saying that has to all now be automated, streamlined, and simplified, and despite the fact that we have on the books laws that prohibit exorbitant fees for
Yep.
those permits, it's like herding cats. We have still 500 different permitting jurisdictions, each of them with their own little fiefdom. And we're starting to see it's like a whack-a-mole game. And it's been this whack-a-mole game since I've been in this industry and paying attention to it. So it's nothing new. But what
Right.
I think is new is the economics are so bad that having a jurisdiction charge $1,000 for a permit for a simple little residential, system, that cuts too deep now. There is no fat to absorb that. There's no way to
Right.
absorb that but to pass it on to the consumer who's already making a more strained decision. Another example is we're starting to see fire departments charge $1,000 additional just for their permit and inspection when you add a battery. So we've got the
Oh my
state saying we
goodness.
want batteries on every single solar system, but then we have these local jurisdictions in each fire department going, oh, I don't know. I don't feel safe with that. Yeah. You're all UL listed. Yes, you've been tested up the yin yang. Yes, no, there's no fires to speak of, but
Right.
we're going to still do our own inspection and charge $1,000 for it. So these local soft costs that we talk about all the time, they're real. And it's really difficult without having, I think, again, a governor who's going, okay, everybody, this is where we're headed. This is the direction. Follow me, and leading the way. I think then it's just left up to everybody to decide. And we have this sort of mayhem. The second huge barrier, which is unique to California in many ways, is we have our contractor licensing board.
Good
That
segue.
is,
I was going to bring that up.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So we've got a 15-member board, mostly appointed by the governor, who just this last April voted to strip away the ability for our solar contractor license to install batteries.
My
So
word.
we sued. We just won a preliminary injunction about 3 weeks ago. The enforcement on those new rules is now held by the court. Thank the God, Lord. But we're still in the process of trying to get that policy and that agency, to just be fair. It's not fair. It's not fair to take away. This is a 40-year-old license. This gets to the uniqueness of California. I mean, we literally invented the photovoltaic cell.
Yeah.
We invented the rooftop solar market. We, as CALSSA, previously CALSSA, literally pushed for this license to come into existence in the late 70s. This license has always been about distributed rooftop solar, and that solar has always had a battery because,
Yeah.
as you know, prior to net metering, there was no grid to export to. Every
No.
solar system had a battery. And so to take that away from this license is basically to take away the ability for the solar contractor to earn a living. I mean, it's, and they have zero, there's no evidence that the solar contractor can't do it. They, in fact, are the experts at doing it. So this is like an existential threat for our industry. And it's being pushed by, allies of our investor-owned utilities, essentially. And it's a really big problem. So we've been fighting these fights alongside all the net metering fights, alongside all the permitting fights. It's really kept us tied up, and it's very difficult to just get the state back on track and then pushing forward in our traditional way.
When I first read the articles about that, I thought it was like a joke. I mean, it was like,
yeah.
Is this Babylon B or something? We're talking about moving electrons, whether it's AC or DC, we're moving electrons, and you're not going to install a solar system without an electrician. So what's the difference if I move my electrons over here to a place they're going to park for a while? I couldn't believe that. I don't even understand the thinking, other than what you might have just mentioned here, that there was a little bit of influence on this from the publicly traded companies.
Yeah. They were the first to introduce this. They bring their union in to fight alongside them, and then that's a very powerful left-right punch in California. We have specialists here in California. We have people that specialize in solar. That is their trade. It's a specialty trade. It's a multi-craft trade. It involves electricity. It involves roofing. It involves carpentry. It is by definition multi-craft. And if you're a consumer, you absolutely want choice, and you want lots of people to choose from, and you want competition. And I think we have a lot of great contractors that came into solar after being pure electrical contractors. They do inside wire work, traditional electrical work. And they said, hey, this solar thing seems cool, right? Similar to, we have a lot of roofers, guys that were just pure roofing companies, and they saw this solar thing taken off, and they're, well, I know roofing, I can do solar. So we've got lots of different ways in which people come into this industry. But our core are the pure solar contractors. And they're the ones that said, I'm going to just do solar, and I'm going to do it really well. And those are the folks that the state agency has just, clobbered with this new rule. It's really tragic.
It's interesting. You have a progressive state with lots of regulations and lots of interests that are driving that. Okay, so we've talked about some headwinds. What are some tailwinds that you see right now? I know things are pretty flat, but what do you see are some tailwinds that will help the industry along?
Whew.
I told you I'd ask you some tough questions here.
I know it is. I'd love to give you a really nice rosy spin. I think, honestly, the reason why I remain quite bullish on this industry, on this market, and on the men and women that I work for every day is this is just a really resilient group of people. They're just tough cookies. They really can't be knocked down for long. And ultimately, rooftop solar with batteries, it's just too good of an idea to keep down for long. So they've knocked us down, they've flatlined us, they've set us back, but they haven't killed us yet. One of the biggest things that we have accomplished over the past couple of years, since sort of this attack on rooftop solar has started in earnest, is that we have kept the solar tax at bay. It has been introduced 3 or 4 times, officially introduced by the state, and we have kept it from becoming policy. If we can keep a tax from being levied on consumers who go solar, then I think as the price of batteries continues to drop, I think solar just ultimately will once again sell itself. And, I think our problems with climate change requiring us to accelerate the adoption of clean energy, that's really that's sort of the biggest casualty here, because I think ultimately businesses, some of which will lose, some of which will be kind of bruised and bloodied from all of this, but they'll kind of like a phoenix, they'll rise back up. Businesses are just really resilient people, and so I think rooftop solar will come back, and I think consumers will demand it once again, and we'll get those prices back down. But I think the biggest question is California doing what it needs to do to deploy clean energy and decarbonize the economy, on par with what the climate science says, but also just on par with what we say we want to do. We've set
Yeah.
all these goals, but all these goals mean nothing if we don't actually take the steps today to get there. And so that's really the thing I think most people, at least in the public policy sector, that's what they should be focused on: is, are
Right.
we actually getting to our clean energy goals, and giving consumers the reliable, affordable energy that they need.
I agree with that 100%. Now I want to pop over to a different topic, because I know it's something that is big on your mind: consumer protection. Okay. Unfortunately, rooftop solar in the residential market has some black eyes. Okay. We've seen a lot of issues with fraud and people putting excessive fees into things. And then we're having lots of issues with the finance companies struggling through some of these things. What do you see it's on the horizon, and what are you guys doing for consumer protection? I know it's not just to protect, I know the type of person you are. It's not just to protect your industry, but it's also to protect the consumer. So what do you guys have cooking on consumer protection?
Well, our number one thing is always, and this gets back to that licensing topic we talked about, the number one thing consumers can do to protect themselves is never feel rushed into any kind of purchase or deal.
Right.
Always get at least 3 bids.
Yep.
Make sure you're working with a properly licensed contractor. Make sure you're communicating with a properly licensed salesperson. California already has a sales license that everybody interacting with consumers needs to have. Just be a smart consumer. The sun is going to come up tomorrow. Take a deep breath, do your homework. None of us rush into major home improvements, right? And there's no reason why solar should be rushed. And if our policymakers put that basic concept front and center as well, then we won't see consumers feeling some sort of rush. California made this massive drastic change to net metering, and they said to consumers, you get 3 months before this changes and goes over a cliff. Well, guess what happened? Everybody rushed to get solar.
Right.
Everybody felt a legitimate urgency. That is not a good setup for the consumer. But that was all created by short-sighted, ill-conceived public policy. And I just think, that is really that is the number one thing, is just make sure consumers have the information they need and they do not feel overly rushed or overly pressured. And what I think we see is, by and large, when we have that kind of a stable market and that kind of support coming from the state, then by and large, most people are incredibly happy with their purchase.
Yeah.
Incredibly happy with their decision. And we've got plenty of good regulations and rules. I often find that, new rules and regulations that go above and beyond the most obvious and basic tend to only slow down the good guys. The bad guys end up flouting every rule and regulation anyway. So get the bad guys out, make sure we have lots of cops on the beat. We spend a lot of time with our enforcement, whether it's the DA's office or, getting just totally unlicensed contractors in jail, or it's our licensing operations, making sure that, there's good cops on the beat to just get rid of the total, scuzzy. But that scuzziness is there in any contracting industry. It's not unique to solar.
No, it's not unique to solar. Unfortunately, solar gets a lot of headlines for that. So,
well, we do, because and I think it's interesting on that front. I think because media loves controversy and they love unlikely, bedfellows, and they, so solar is supposed to be the darling angel, and so then if that angel, the fallen angel is like a classic, tantalizing media story. But also, I think what we have seen in California, and now I'm seeing play out across the country as this attack on rooftop solar now spreads to other states, is definitely the leading fight is always consumer protection. So you start to see all these stories come out of the blue on consumer protection type issues, and then net metering fights follow right behind.
crazy. It's crazy. I'm like you. I tell people get lots of bids, tell people to don't be in a hurry. And then I also tell them to ask a lot of questions around financial disclosure.
Oh
That's
yeah.
generally where the most of these issues happen.
Yep.
You'll see the idiots in this industry and the bad actors who will put in all kinds of crazy fees and stuff like that as if they're adders in a deal. And I think that's where the industry needs to get cleaned up is training. It's great that California has licensure. Most other states don't. Changing some of the business models where they're W-2s compared to independent contractors. There's a lot of things could happen there, but I think financial disclosure is one of the biggest areas that the industry needs help on because look how many, newsworthy stories have been that have been traditionally big, and I won't name them because I don't want to poke anybody out or endorse anybody, but the biggest players in this industry from the finances are suffering because of the lack of proper financial disclosure.
Yeah, and one of the things that we have put in place in California is a requirement that a third party from corporate headquarters gives the consumer a call. It's
Yeah.
on a recorded line.
Yep.
It's days after the purchasing decision, and just make sure that the consumer knows exactly what they purchased and they're happy with their purchase. And it's within the amount of time that they have to back out if they are unhappy. I think it's a really important consumer protection. A lot of people don't know that that is already in place in the state and followed by all the major financiers. So I think it's a really important thing for other states to follow and for consumers to just be aware of that. That's a good consumer protection provision.
Yeah, and there's a lot of the finance companies are now going to first call verification to make sure that first call that there's not hanky panky going on, that you're working with a licensed professional. I think it's
Yep.
good. Over time, these things will get cleaned up. In my opinion, even though the industry's been around since the mid 1990s, we're still in very early adopter stages in this industry. So things will change. We're going to have more improvements. That's one of the fun things I get to do as a podcaster. Oh, man, I find so many cool new things. Samsung just released a solid state battery this summer for EVs, doubling the mileage. So this stuff just keeps coming out. Smart breakers and all the cool things that are coming. So it's a little bit of Wild West, but it's really encouraging because competition will bring prices down. And there's so much promise for this, and I believe in it. I'm one of these that's really bullish on the industry, and I look at everything in the industry. Okay, so a little bit, we'll wrap this up here shortly. What's next for CALSSA? What's your big initiatives that you guys are trying to just, besides surviving this flat line, what do you guys have on your horizon that's big BHAGs that you're chasing down right now?
Well, number one is our message. Number one is stop doing any more harm. Stop. There's proposals out there to undo net metering 1.0 and 2.0 and claw back savings from our existing early adopters, which just really they do not belong in California and the policy conversation. So stop the taxes. Stop the unnecessary high fixed charges. All the things that erode the value of distributed generation need to stop. California needs to really lean into reducing these costs. Again, permitting, interconnection, licensing. We're looking at property tax issues coming up where our property tax exemption is set to expire. So that really could add a lot of costs for consumers that can't afford to see their property bills go up because they want solar. So there's still unfortunately, some just basic housekeeping that isn't very inspiring, but it's the kind of thing, it's the bread and butter issues that this industry is really built on. And if we don't keep our eyes on that, and one of my board members, Rick Reed, once gave me a wonderful analogy, which is, there are boulders and then there are pebbles. And if you're running a marathon, which this movement toward clean energy is a marathon, sometimes it's the pebble in your shoe that can cause more harm. So we spend an awful lot of time clearing out those pebbles and playing that whack-a-mole game, but just to try to streamline that process for our industry and for our consumers. And then the third is, you can call it virtual power plants. It's not really a name most people out on the streets know what you're talking about. What I like to talk about is California should set its sights on 1 million solar batteries. We have built about 200,000 batteries so far to date. actually, if you add those batteries up, that's one of my favorite facts. If you add all those batteries up, it's over 2 gigawatts of battery storage, all charged up by solar panels. It's the biggest battery in the world, is hanging on the garage of California homes. That, though, is just a fraction of what we could build. We should have set our sights on 1 million batteries, just like we did for rooftop solar. Just blow the roof off of costs, get them come way down, work out all these kinks that you talk about, and shut down all of those dirty, peaking natural gas power plants so that we can really provide clean, reliable, renewable power to California 24 hours a day. That's what we need. And there's all sorts of different policy ideas for how to get there. But what we need is for our political leaders in Sacramento to embrace that vision and help us make it a reality sooner than later.
Well, like I said, that's my favorite phrase is we need policy upgrade. We don't,
There
the
you go.
technology upgrades are cool, but we need policy upgrade. That's probably the biggest issue in the industry. Well, I thank you. You have been so generous with your time today. And it's really good to have somebody who's right in the core of this because, most consumers we're headline readers. Get snippet here, snippet there. And then, of course, all the politics and spin, and you don't know what to believe. And so it's been really great to talk to somebody who's inside the tornado, knows what's going on, understands the policy issues and stuff like that. So I have one final question for you, and I ask this of all my guests, and it has nothing to do with solar or energy or anything like that. Okay. We as humans, we've been in this Western culture, we've kind of been fed this bucket list idea. Okay, I got a bucket list. I'm going to do these things before I end my time on Earth, right? Well, in the universe, there's always the opposite of everything, right? There's a yin and a yang. Now, there's another list out there. It rhymes with bucket and starts with an F, but it's a family show. So we don't want to say that, but it's an effort list, right? What might something on your effort list be? Now, for me, it'd be like, the Indiana Jones, movie when they pile him down the snakes. Oh man, I would lose my mind. Okay. So what might be something that is on Bernadette's effort list?
Oh, oh boy. Wow. I have never been asked that question.
I told you I would bring you some hard questions today.
I love it. Um, you know, honestly, okay, I don't know if this is totally a weird answer and not even in line with where you want to go.
No, I'm not going anywhere. This is just
Okay.
whatever comes to your mind and things that you go, woo, I don't want any of that.
I think partially why I've been drawn to the work I do. I really I sort of can't stand the idea of anybody sort of being muzzled or being told that you can't sort of solve something. Like you can't work to solve it. You just have to accept this.
Right.
I know, no, that sounds so, maybe it's just too cliche sounding or something, but honestly, if somebody said, you can't fix this problem, like you just have to live with PG&E being PG&E for the rest of your life, and things just have to stay the way they are. To me, that's the equivalent of being in a pit of snakes. Like that gets under my skin. I can't stand that idea. And I just, it would be so horrible to live in a place in which, there's sort of our democracy is under a microscope right now in this country, right? With the presidential election and all of the debate around it. But I actually think our democracy is an amazing thing. And the ability for just, a random young girl from Sonoma, daughter of just, regular, beautiful, but middle-class people, could actually like spend her lifetime trying to fix these problems with others in, coordination. I mean, what an amazing thing that I get to do every day. And if you told me that we lived in a dictatorship and the king didn't like it and you just had to suck it up, it would be like living in a pit of snakes. I just would find that so hard to live that way. So, yeah, I guess I don't mean to sound highfalutin, but yeah, in a very simple way, being told you can't fix problems in this world and you have to just live with them. that would be the worst thing. That would just be the worst thing in the world.
Well, I'm a father of five, and I will tell my adult children this. If you think things won't be different in 20 years, you're crazy. Okay? The
Yeah.
human spirit is resilient, and no matter what goes on, there's always ways to solve things. And so,
Yep.
very clear to me, based on your answer, that the good folks who are members of your community and also CALSSA are blessed to have you. So, thanks again for
So
coming
sweet.
on. All right,
Thank
folks,
you, Rex.
we'll call this a wrap. Glad to have Bernadette with us today. Look forward to the next episodes that are coming up. We always want to thank our sponsors that have been able to make this program possible. I always tell people, keep your eyes open. Innovation, policy. There's a lot of good things happening in this world. So until next time, I will say what I always say. Thanks, and make it a great day.